My son Corey lay in the hospital bed, bruised and breathing. I sat beside him, rolling Donna's wedding ring between my thumb and forefinger, telling myself it was black ice. Just black ice. The old man in the next bed leaned forward, oxygen cannula, taped glasses, eyes locked on me. "He's alive," Walt Dunmore whispered. "He owes a fortune." "Back off," I said. "You don't know my son." Walt pointed one trembling finger at the clear plastic belongings bag on the side table. A crumpled bank statement. The number read $280,000. "One moment. Please subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Your presence here truly matters. My name is Ray Strickland. I'm 64 years old. I've been a pipe fitter at Buckeye Steel Fabrication in Columbus, Ohio for 38 years. I've never missed a shift. Not one. Not when my back seized up in '04. Not when Donna got the diagnosis. Not when my son stopped returning my calls. The phone rang at 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday in February. I know the exact time because the red numbers on the clock were the first thing I saw when I reached across the empty side of the bed. Donna's side. 2 years empty, and I still slept on the left. "Mr. Strickland, this is Grant Medical Center. Your son Corey has been admitted following a motor vehicle accident on Highway 315. His condition is stable, but we're holding him for observation. Can you come in?" I said yes. I don't remember what else she said. I was already standing, already reaching for my pants on the chair, already doing what I've done my whole life when something breaks. Show up, fix it. The closet door stuck on the carpet the way it always does. Donna's clothes still hung on the right side. Her dresses, her blouses, the blue cardigan she wore to church. I hadn't moved them, hadn't touched them. Her charcoal wool peacoat hung at the end of the rod, the one she bought me 15 years ago at Nordstrom Rack, because she said I deserved one nice coat. The wool still held a trace of lavender from the sachets she kept in every drawer and closet in the house. I pulled it on over my flannel shirt, grabbed my keys from the ceramic bowl by the front door, stepped out into February. Columbus in mid-February is just cold. The kind of cold that finds every gap in your clothes and stays there. The sleet hit my face like fine gravel as I crossed the driveway to my truck. 26 degrees. Salt-crusted roads. The streets were empty. Just me, the freezing rain, and the wipers beating back and forth across the windshield. I drove north on High Street toward 315, my hands tight on the wheel, my mind running calculations the way it does at the plant. Stable condition. Observation hold. Motor vehicle accident. Those words meant something, and they also meant something else. Stable meant alive. Observation meant they were watching for what might still go wrong. Motor vehicle accident at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday in February meant a question nobody had asked me yet. I was born 6 miles from where I was driving. South Columbus. My father, Carl Strickland, worked the line at the GM plant in Westerville for 31 years until they closed it. He came home every night smelling like cutting oil and metal shavings, ate dinner without complaint, and went to bed at 9. He taught me 2 things. First, tools have no opinions. A wrench doesn't care if you're tired or angry or heartbroken. It does what you tell it. Second, you show up. Every day. No matter what. I married Donna Calloway when I was 22. Courthouse ceremony. She wore her mother's dress, altered at the waist with safety pins because there wasn't money for a tailor. I wore shoes I'd borrowed from my cousin Frank because mine had a split sole. The judge took 4 minutes. Donna cried. I didn't. I held her hand and thought, this is the best thing I will ever do. She was right about most things. She worked at Reinhardt and Associates, a law firm on East Broad Street, for 22 years. Started as a receptionist, ended as office manager. She read contracts the way I read pipe schematics. She found the weak joints before they failed. She brought documents home at night and sat at the kitchen table with her wire-rimmed bifocals sliding down her nose, marking up pages with a red pen. I'd sought her in the garage. She'd read at the table. We didn't need to be in the same room to be together. We tried for a child for 7 years. Donna saw 3 specialists. I went to every appointment, sat in waiting rooms with magazines I didn't read, held her hand when the results came back wrong. She was 29 when the doctor told us it probably wasn't going to happen. We drove home, and she didn't speak for 30 minutes. Then she said, "We'll be fine, Ray. We have each other." I believed her because she was Donna, and she was always right. Corey arrived when I was 30. June 14th, 1992. 7 pounds, 9 ounces. He had Donna's brown eyes and my jaw. I held him in the delivery room, and my hands, the same hands that welded pipe joints and built bridge models, shook so hard the nurse asked if I needed to sit down. I didn't sit down. I stood there holding my son, and I made him a promise. Not out loud. Just to myself, where promises count the most. I promised him I would never stop showing up. I kept that promise for 34 years. I paid my half of Corey's Ohio State tuition, $14,000 a year for 4 years. Overtime shifts, Saturdays, holidays. I'd drive home at midnight smelling like welding flux and coffee, and Donna would have a plate waiting in the microwave. She never complained. Not once. She'd sit across from me while I ate and tell me about Corey's grades, his baseball stats, the girl he'd mentioned at dinner. When Corey graduated with his business degree, Donna and I sat in the 4th row of the Schottenstein Center and watched him walk across the stage. She gripped my hand so hard, I lost circulation in 2 fingers. Didn't matter. That was the best day. He got his commercial real estate license at 26. Smart kid. Good with people. Had that thing Donna called the gift, where he could talk to anyone about anything and make them feel like they were the only person in the room. He needed $40,000 to get started. Office lease, marketing, licenses, a car that didn't look like it belonged to a pipefitter's son. I wrote the check. He promised to pay it back. I never asked. Not once in 8 years. Then the house. Corey found a colonial revival in Westerville. Brookfield Estates. $425,000. 3-car garage. Granite countertops. The kind of place I never lived in and never wanted to. But Corey wanted it. Jess, his wife, a dental hygienist he'd married 2 years earlier, wanted it. And my granddaughter Lily was on the way. Fifth Third Bank required a cosigner. Corey's credit was thin. His income was commission-based and unpredictable. The bank wanted collateral. I put up my house. The bungalow on Freebus Avenue. 1,400 square feet of brick that Donna and I bought in 1986 for $47,000 and paid off in 2008. 22 years of mortgage payments, every one on time, and now it belonged to me and Donna free and clear. I signed the cosigner documents at the kitchen table, while Donna sat beside me wearing her reading glasses, going through every page. "You're sure?" she said. "Not a question. He's our son." "I know who he is, Ray. I'm asking if you're sure." I signed. She watched me sign. Then she took the documents to work the next day and had her firm's real estate attorney review every clause. When she brought them back, there was an addendum her attorney had attached. I didn't read it. Donna had read it. That was enough. $340,000. That's what I guaranteed with my name and my house. Because he was my son, and I promised him I would never stop showing up. Donna died 2 years before that phone call. Pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis came on a Thursday in March. We drove home from the oncologist's office, and neither of us spoke for 45 minutes. Donna stared out the passenger window. I stared at the road. There was nothing to say that could change what the doctor had said, so we didn't pretend there was. I took FMLA leave. 4 months. First time in 38 years. I wasn't on the floor. Pete filed it as approved absence, not missed shifts. The streak held, technically. I didn't care about the streak anymore. I spent every day at her bedside. Read to her, held her hand. Watched her shrink. She went from 140 pounds to 94. Her reading glasses got too heavy for her face. Her hands couldn't hold a book, but her mind stayed sharp. Right up to the end, she was Donna. Her last week, she told me to check the fireproof box under the bed if anything ever went wrong with Corey. I said nothing would go wrong. She looked at me with those brown eyes, the same eyes she'd given our son, and said, "Promise me you'll check." I promised. She died on a Sunday morning in July. I was holding her hand. The monitors changed their tone, and a nurse came in, and I just sat there, holding on, because letting go meant it was real. Her reading glasses still sit on the nightstand. Wire-rimmed bifocals with tortoiseshell accents. I've dusted them twice. Never moved them. Her wedding ring, a 1/4-carat diamond I bought with 3 months of wages before Buckeye, rides in my right front pocket every day. Warm from my body heat. I can find it by touch among the coins and keys without looking. After the funeral, I went back to Buckeye Steel. Pete Aguilar, my supervisor, a 58-year-old Navy veteran with a gray goatee who'd worked double shifts to cover me for 4 months, shook my hand at the gate and said, "Welcome back, Strick." I went to the garage that first weekend home alone and picked up my soldering iron. 11 scale model bridges sat on the walnut shelves I'd built along the back wall. Golden Gate, Brooklyn, Roebling suspension, months of work in each one. Brass and copper, fitted and soldered by hand. No glue, no shortcuts. Donna used to joke that I loved those bridges more than her cooking. She wasn't far off. I started the Ponte Vecchio that week. Cut the base plate from 1/4-inch brass stock. Soldered the first 3 arches. The 4th arch was drawn on paper, measured, ready to cut. I set down the soldering iron and couldn't pick it up again. The bridge sat on the workbench and I sat on the stool, and the garage was quiet, in a way it had never been when Donna was alive. She'd come out with coffee and stand in the doorway watching me work, asking questions she already knew the answers to, because she knew I liked explaining things. Nobody came to the doorway anymore. The Ponte Vecchio has been sitting on that bench for 2 years. Half finished. The solder joints on the first 3 arches are turning green. I walk past it every morning on my way to the truck, and every evening on my way back in, and I don't touch it. That's where I was when the phone rang. Asleep on the left side of the bed, in a house that smelled like pipe solder and lavender, with reading glasses on the nightstand and a ring in my pocket and an unfinished bridge in the garage. I drove past the wreck site near the Ackerman Road exit. Police tape remnants fluttered from the guardrail. The median barrier was gouged in a long, ragged scar where something heavy had hit it and dragged. Amber glass from a broken turn signal lay scattered in the slush, catching my headlights. I slowed down, looked at the marks. The gouge ran at least 40 feet. That wasn't a swerve. That was a drift. A controlled swerve leaves short, sharp marks. A drift leaves a long, wandering scar. I'd read enough accident reports at the plant to know the difference. I filed that observation away and kept driving. Grant Medical Center. 3rd floor. A nurse in blue scrubs led me down a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. My red wings squeaked on the linoleum. The fluorescent lights overhead turned everything the same shade of gray. The heating ducts ticked and hummed above the ceiling tiles, pushing warm air that smelled like nowhere. The room was semi-private. 2 beds separated by a thin, beige curtain. A fogged window overlooked the parking garage below, headlights moving through sleet. Medical equipment hummed and beeped in a rhythm that was supposed to be reassuring, but wasn't. Corey was in the far bed. I saw him before he saw me. His face was bruised along the left cheekbone, purple and yellow spreading toward his ear. His hospital gown hung loose. I noticed other things I didn't want to notice. His build had gone soft in the past year. Sandy hair unwashed, falling over his forehead. When he heard my boots on the floor, he turned his head and his brown eyes, Donna's eyes, slid across my face without stopping. Looked at my chest, my hands, the chair. Anywhere but my eyes. The Shinola watch Donna had given him for his 30th birthday sat in the clear plastic belongings bag on the side table. The midnight blue dial caught the fluorescent light. Next to the watch in the same bag, his wallet, his keys, and a crumpled piece of paper I didn't examine. In the near bed, on the other side of the curtain, an old man lay propped on thin pillows. I barely looked at him. Just registered the basics. Gaunt. Oxygen cannula looped around his ears. Thick glasses with medical tape holding one arm together. His hands moved in small, precise strokes, working a butter knife against something too small to see from where I stood. A tongue depressor, maybe. The rhythmic scraping of dull metal against wood blended into the background noise of monitors and forced air. I pulled the vinyl chair to Corey's bedside. The legs scraped across linoleum. I sat down and took his hand without saying a word. "Dad." His voice was rough. It was black ice on 315. A deer came out of nowhere near Ackerman, and I swerved. "That's it." "You're okay," I said. "I'm fine, just banged up. Look, it was stupid, I should have been going slower, but the ice was bad and the deer just appeared." "Okay? You believe me, right?" I held his hand, my son's hand. Soft palm, smooth fingers, not a callus on him. I squeezed once. "I believe you." The 40-foot gouge on the barrier said something different. I filed that away too, because 34 years of fatherhood had trained me to believe my son first. Questions could wait. They always could, and I had spent my entire life, when it came to Corey, choosing easier. Dr. Ananmetta arrived 20 minutes later. Calm, mid-40s, white coat over blue scrubs. He introduced himself, shook my hand, and pulled up Corey's chart on the wall-mounted screen. "We're going to keep him for 72 hours, Dr. Mehta said. Standard observation for the head trauma. We want to rule out any delayed internal bleeding." I nodded. "Is he going to be okay?" I asked. "Physically, yes. The scans look clean so far." He paused, a specific pause. The kind where the next word gets chosen with too much care. "We'll be monitoring everything closely, given the circumstances of admission." Circumstances of admission. Not the accident, not the wreck. Circumstances. The words landed wrong, like a measurement that doesn't match the blueprint. I set them aside. I looked at Dr. Mehta. He looked back at me, and in his eyes I saw a man who wanted to say more and couldn't. A professional caught between what he knew and what he was allowed to share. "Thank you, doctor," I said. He nodded once and left. His shoes made no sound on the linoleum. I sat back in the chair and folded the peacoat across my lap. Donna's ring found its way between my thumb and forefinger. I rolled it back and forth, feeling the small diamond catch against my calloused skin. Corey's breathing slowed. His eyes closed. The bruise on his cheekbone darkened under the fluorescent light. He was alive. That was all that mattered. I told myself that 3 times. He was alive. That was all that mattered. He was alive. That was all that mattered. Repeating it the way you repeat a measurement before you cut, to make sure you're right. Behind the curtain, the scraping stopped. The rhythmic sound of butter knife against wood, the sound that had been there since I walked in, went quiet. Not the gradual silence of someone falling asleep. A deliberate stop. The way you set down a tool when something more important needs your attention. I noticed the silence, the way you notice a machine shutting off on the plant floor. Background noise. You didn't know you were tracking until it disappeared. I glanced toward the curtain. Just an old man settling in for the night. Nothing more. I didn't know it then, but the old man behind the curtain was listening. He'd heard this story before. He'd told it to himself for 6 years. Jess arrived at 11 the next morning. I heard her before I saw her. Quick steps trying to look unhurried. Not pulling it off. She came through the doorway in wrinkled dental scrubs, the lavender ones from Dr. Kimball's office in Gahanna. Dark circles sat under her green eyes like bruises of their own. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had been done in a car mirror. The concealer on her cheeks was a shade too warm for her winter-pale skin. Donna would have noticed before I did. My daughter-in-law hugged me. She pressed her face into the shoulder of the peacoat and said, "Dad, I came as fast as I could. I had to drop Lily at school first. She smelled like coffee and something else. Fear, maybe, if fear had a smell." Her hands trembled against my back. "He's okay," I said. "Banged up. They're keeping him for observation." "I know. They called me too." She pulled back and looked at Corey. Her face did something complicated. Relief and anger and exhaustion crossing it one after another, none staying long enough to hold. Then she put on a smile. Bright. Practiced. The kind of smile you build for waiting rooms and in-laws. "Hey, babe," she said, crossing to his bed. "How are you feeling?" "I'm fine," Corey said. It was just black ice. Jess kissed his forehead. Her wedding ring caught the fluorescent light as she reached for his hand. The band spun loose on her finger. She'd lost weight, 15 pounds at least since Thanksgiving. Her wrists were sharp under the scrub cuffs. I noticed. I told myself dental hygienists work long hours. Stress. The economy. Everyone was losing weight. Lily came after school. Jess's mother dropped her off at 3:15. My granddaughter was 9 years old, brown hair in 2 braids, wearing a puffy coat she hadn't grown into yet. She had her mother's green eyes and her father's jaw. She walked into the hospital room the way you walk onto a job site you don't trust. Slow. Checking everything. She bypassed both her parents and came straight to me. Her arms wrapped around my leg. Her face pressed into my thigh. "Hi, Grandpa." "Hey, Lilybug." She didn't let go. She held on, the way you hold onto a railing when the stairs are icy. Not letting go. "Is Daddy going to be okay?" she asked. Her voice was small. Not scared exactly. Practiced. She'd asked this question before, about other things. "He's going to be just fine," I said. She looked up at me. Green eyes. Searching. "Daddy's been sick a lot," she whispered. I smoothed her braids. "Flu season," I said. "Everybody gets sick this time of year." Lily nodded, but her arms didn't loosen from my leg, and her eyes didn't stop watching the room, the way a 9-year-old's eyes should never watch a room. Corey put on a show. He sat up straighter in the bed. He turned off the basketball game and held his arms out. "Come here, kiddo. Your old man's tough. Takes more than a little ice to keep me down." Lily went to him. She climbed onto the edge of the bed and let him hold her. Over her shoulder, his eyes met Jess's. Something passed between them. A look I wasn't supposed to catch. A warning, or a plea. I caught it anyway. Jess picked at the skin around her right thumbnail. Just a small, repetitive motion. Pinch and pull. Pinch and pull. I'd never seen her do it before. After 30 minutes, Jess took Lily to the cafeteria for a snack. The room went quiet, except for monitors and the steady scrape of Walt's butter knife behind the curtain. Corey's phone buzzed on the side table. He grabbed it fast. silenced it, set it face down. Work, he said, checking on me. Popular guy. You know how it is. Deals don't stop because you're in the hospital. I nodded, but I was thinking about the months before this bed. After Donna's funeral, Corey seemed fine. Better than fine. That September, 3 months after we buried her, he closed a deal on a commercial lot in Grandview. $68,000 in commission. He called me from the brokerage parking lot, voice cracking with excitement. Dad, I did it. The Grandview lot. Everyone said it was dead, and I closed it. That's my boy. I'm taking Jess and Lily to Hilton Head. You should come, I'm serious. I didn't go. I wasn't ready for vacations. I was still sleeping on the left side of the bed and talking to reading glasses on a nightstand. But I was proud. Donna would have been proud. Our son was going to be fine. He wasn't. October, things started to shift. Corey canceled our Sunday dinner. Sorry, Dad, client meeting ran late. Next week, for sure. He canceled the next Sunday, too. And the one after that. By November, the Sunday dinners that had been weekly since Donna died, the ones I'd been counting on, the way you count heartbeats, stopped without announcement. They just weren't anymore. His phone calls changed. They got shorter. 5 minutes where they used to be 20. And they all started the same way. Listen, Dad, I'm between meetings. Look, Dad, I've got a call coming in. Listen. Look. 2 words that used to mean nothing. 2 words I now understand were the fittings that held every lie together. Pull them out, and the whole line falls apart. Every time my son started a sentence with listen or look, what followed was a lie. I didn't know that then. I know it now. His phone buzzed again in the hospital bed. He silenced it without looking. Persistent, I said. You know how brokers are. I didn't know how brokers were. I knew pipe fitters. We showed up, did the work, went home. Nobody called at midnight unless a joint had failed. Thanksgiving. The one detail I kept coming back to. Corey arrived 40 minutes late to the bungalow on Phoebus Avenue, where I'd set the table with Donna's good china because she would have wanted it that way. He came through the front door in a wrinkled Oxford shirt, top button undone, tie loosened. He smiled too wide. He hugged me too hard. And he smelled wrong. Mouthwash. Wintergreen. The heavy, medicinal kind you buy at CVS. Not the gentle stuff Donna kept in the bathroom cabinet. Underneath it, riding just below the mint, something sharper. Warmer. I'd smelled it on men at the plant after Friday payday. Whiskey. I told myself he'd had one drink. One holiday drink to take the edge off, because the holidays were hard without Donna. That was reasonable. That was normal. Jess sat across from him at the table, cutting Lily's turkey into small pieces, her mouth a thin line. Corey talked too much and too fast. Told a story about a strip mall in Hilliard that was going to be huge, and a developer from Cleveland who was very interested. His hands moved in the air like a man drawing blueprints for buildings that would never get built. Jess said, the mortgage payment was late again. The table went quiet. Lily looked up from her plate. Corey's fork stopped midair. Not here, he said. When, then? Because I called Fifth Third and they said... I said not here, Jess. His voice dropped to something hard and flat. Not loud, not a shout. Something worse. The controlled anger of a man who knows he's caught and needs the conversation to stop right now. Jess's mouth closed. She went back to cutting turkey. Her hands moved with the mechanical precision of someone who has learned not to push. Nobody mentioned it again. We ate pie. We watched football. I drove home and told myself, every family has rough patches. Donna and I had rough patches. You work through them. Christmas was worse. Corey came to the bungalow on Christmas Eve. Just him. Jess had taken Lily to her parents' house in Dublin. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd signed the mortgage documents 4 years earlier, and he said he needed $5,000. There's a closing, commercial lease in the short north. It's about to hit, Dad. I just need to bridge the gap for 2 weeks. I wrote the check, didn't ask questions, didn't ask what happened to the $68,000 from Grandview, didn't ask why a man with a broker's license needed $5,000 from his father to bridge a 2-week gap. I just handed him a check and watched him fold it into his shirt pocket and promise he'd pay me back. He didn't pay me back. The closing never came. I never asked. That was $45,000 total. $40,000 for the startup. $5,000 for the closing that didn't exist. I added the numbers the way you add measurements on a project that's going wrong. You don't say it out loud. You just write it down and keep going. January. I drove to Westerville on a Tuesday afternoon. No call ahead. I'd been thinking about the mortgage payment Jess mentioned, and I wanted to see the house. Not inspect it, just see it. The snow on the front lawn hadn't been shoveled in weeks. Ridges of ice formed steps up the walkway where footprints had melted and refrozen. The driveway had one set of tire tracks. Through the front door's narrow glass panel, I could see a pile of mail on the floor. Envelopes, flyers, a FedEx package. 3 weeks of accumulation at least. I knocked. No answer. Knocked again. The door opened. Lily stood there in pajama pants and a sweatshirt, barefoot, her hair uncombed. Hi, Grandpa. Hey, Lilybug. Where's your dad? At work. It was 6 in the evening. She was alone. The living room behind her was lit by the blue glow of the television, cartoons playing to an empty couch. Dishes sat in the kitchen sink. A cereal box stood open on the counter. Where's your mom? Lily's eyes moved to the staircase. In the bedroom, crying. I stood on that doorstep. My granddaughter looked up at me with those green eyes. She was still 9 then, her birthday not until March. 9 years old, standing barefoot on a cold floor, watching cartoons by herself while her mother cried upstairs and her father was, wherever her father was. I should have walked inside. I should have gone upstairs and talked to Jess. I should have sat Lily down and asked her real questions and listened to real answers. But I didn't. Because asking real questions meant getting real answers, and I wasn't ready for what real answers might look like. Tell your mom I stopped by, and put some socks on, Lilybug. Floor's cold. I drove home and told myself every family has rough patches. Now I sat in the hospital room, watching my son sleep, and the rough patches lined up in a row. The canceled dinners, the short calls, the mouthwash, the late mortgage, the $5,000, the unshoveled snow and the mail on the floor and my granddaughter watching cartoons alone. I knew what they added up to. I had known for months. I just hadn't been willing to do the arithmetic. Corey's phone rang again. His eyes snapped open. He grabbed it, glanced at the screen, and hit the red button. The motion was rehearsed. Thumb to screen in under a second, like a reflex. Just the office, he said. But I'd seen the screen. Not the name, not the number. Just the format. 3 digits, a hyphen, 3 digits, a hyphen, 4 digits. The area code wasn't his brokerage. Wasn't a client. I'd called Corey's office enough times to know the prefix by heart. This wasn't it. He caught me looking. His hand moved the phone under his pillow with a gesture that was supposed to look casual. It wasn't casual. It was practiced. The smooth, automatic motion of a man who has been hiding his phone screen for a long time. Behind the curtain, Walt's voice came through, gravelly and thin between breaths. Your boy, he get many visitors, because mine didn't. Toward the end, I turned in my chair. Through the gap where the curtain didn't quite meet the wall, I could see Walt's profile. His fingers still working the tongue depressor. His eyes on the ceiling. My family is none of your business, I said. Walt didn't respond. The scraping of the butter knife resumed, steady and patient. The sound of a man who had said what he came to say and could wait. Hours passed. Jess took Lily home at 6. Promised to come back in the morning. Corey slept off and on, waking to check his phone, always face down, always quick. The monitors beeped their steady count. The fluorescent lights hummed. Outside the fogged window, Columbus went dark. Dr. Mehta came at 9 p.m. 24-hour check. He reviewed the chart on the wall screen, clicked through pages of data I couldn't read from across the room. His face stayed neutral, professional. Everything look okay? I asked. The scans are clear. No delayed bleeding. He paused, clicked to another screen. Corey, your blood work showed some concerning markers beyond the trauma injuries. I'd like to discuss them with you. Corey's jaw tightened. Sure, Doc. Whatever you need. Dr. Mehta looked at me, then back at Corey. I'll discuss the details with the patient when appropriate. The patient. Not your son. Not Corey. The patient. I heard the distinction. Filed it with everything else. Look, Dad, it's nothing, Corey said after the doctor left. Probably just dehydration. They always find something to bill for. Look. There it was again. The fitting that held up every lie he'd told me for a year. An hour later, a nurse came in to adjust Corey's IV drip. Young woman, efficient hands, checking the flow rate and tapping the line. A second nurse stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand. The point, 1-4 in bed 2, needs the updated chart. The doorway nurse said. Casual. Shop talk. The shorthand that people in every profession develop when they've said the same things 1,000 times. Point 1-4. The words passed through the room, the way pipe measurements pass through a fabrication floor. Professional notation. A number. The nurse at Corey's IV didn't react. The nurse in the doorway handed over the clipboard and left. Corey stared at the television. His jaw was set. I sat in the chair. The number sat in my head. Point 1-4. Point 1-4. I didn't process it the first second. Not the second. The third second, it landed. Blood alcohol content. Point 1-4. The legal limit in Ohio is 0.08. Point 1-4 was nearly twice that. My son had been drunk when he wrecked his truck at 2 in the morning on Highway 315. There was no deer. There was no black ice. There was a man behind the wheel with a blood alcohol level of 0.4, driving 40 minutes on a highway in February sleet, and the 40-foot gouge on the median barrier wasn't a swerve. It was a drift. The drift of a man whose reflexes were drowning in whiskey. Walt's eyes met mine through the gap in the curtain. He held the look. 3 seconds. 4, 5. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His gaze moved from my face to the clear plastic belongings bag on Corey's side table. The bag with the Shinola watch. The wallet, the keys, the crumpled piece of paper I still hadn't examined. Then Walt looked away. My hand was in my pocket. Donna's ring pressed against my thumb so hard, the diamond cut a crescent into my skin. I was doing math I didn't want to do. Crass, at 2:14 a.m. The body burns off about 0.015 per hour. That put him at 0.2 something when he started drinking. Maybe higher. 12, 14 drinks at minimum. Then he got in his truck and drove. I looked at my son's face. He was watching a basketball game. The Cavaliers, up by 9. His jaw worked back and forth, grinding his teeth. He knew I'd heard the nurse. He knew I was doing the math. And he sat there watching basketball, because watching basketball was easier than looking at me. I said nothing. Added it to the folder in my head. The folder with Dr. Mehta's pauses, and the phone calls, and the mouthwash at Thanksgiving, and the $5,000, and the unshoveled snow. The folder was getting heavy. I could feel its weight behind my eyes. Corey's phone buzzed on the side table. The screen lit up. He didn't grab it fast enough. The text sat there glowing in the dim room for 3 full seconds before his hand closed over it. 3 seconds was enough. The name on the screen was Marcus. I didn't know anyone named Marcus in Corey's life. The message read, "Bro, you need to call the lawyer now." The lawyer. Capital N, capital O, capital W. Now. Corey read the text. His face cycled through 3 things in 2 seconds. His eyes went wide. Then they narrowed, calculating, the same expression he wore when he was working a deal. Then his face went flat. The way a poker player's goes when the cards are bad. He pocketed the phone and turned back to the game. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just Marcus from the office. Nothing important." I didn't know who Marcus was. I didn't know what lawyer. But the word "now" in capital letters from a person I'd never heard of about a lawyer I didn't know existed told me something. It told me the folder in my head was about to get a lot heavier. Footsteps in the hallway. Jess appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 coffees in a cardboard carrier. She'd changed into a gray sweater that hung loose on her frame. Her hair was still in the ponytail. The coffee smelled burnt, the way hospital cafeteria coffee always does. She stopped mid-step. Her eyes had gone to Corey's phone. The lock screen still showed the notification preview. "Marcus, the lawyer. Now." The color left her face. Not slowly. Fast. Like someone pulled a plug. She stood in the doorway holding 2 coffees, and the blood drained from her cheeks and her lips pressed together. And her eyes went to Corey, then to me, then back to Corey. She opened her mouth, closed it. She set the coffees down on the windowsill next to the 3 empties from earlier. Sat in the second chair, pulled her right hand into her lap. Her thumb found the skin beside her thumbnail and began to pick. Pinch and pull. Pinch and pull. Small, repetitive, mechanical. After 30 seconds, a thin line of blood appeared at the cuticle. She didn't stop. I watched her bleed. My daughter-in-law sat 6 feet from me, picking her own skin until it bled, because she knew what that text meant, and she couldn't say it, and she couldn't stop it. And the only thing she could control was this small, private destruction of her own hand. I felt something give. Not in the room, in me. Not a break, a hairline fracture, the kind you find in pipe joints that look solid until you put pressure on them. The kind that holds for months or years, and then, one day, gives way all at once. I held Donna's ring. The diamond pressed into the crescent it had already cut. My son watched basketball. My daughter-in-law bled. My granddaughter was somewhere in Dublin, sleeping with the light on. Behind the curtain, the scraping stopped. I heard Walt set down his butter knife. The soft click of wood on the side table. His half-carved heron, the long-necked bird that watches and waits, placed beside the fox and the turtle and the bear. The old man in the next bed stared at the ceiling tiles. He was somewhere else. Somewhere years ago, in another hospital room or another living room, watching his own son's lies stack up like cordwood. Watching himself choose not to see. Remembering what it cost him. He lay there in the silence between my family's lies and his own family's wreckage, and I could feel it through the curtain the way you feel a current through a wall. Something had changed. The old man was done watching. The curtain rings scraped across the rod like fingernails on pipe. I turned my head. The beige fabric bunched and folded as Walt Dunmore pushed it aside with one arm, the other gripping the bed rail for balance. The curtain that had separated our 2 worlds for 42 hours slid back, and the old man sat there, looking at me across 6 feet of linoleum. His oxygen concentrator clicked and hummed beside him. The cannula sat in his nostrils. His thick glasses caught the fluorescent light, one arm still held together with medical tape. On his bedside table, the menagerie of carved tongue depressor animals stood in a row. Fox, bear, heron, turtle, 3 rabbits. Tiny monuments built by trembling hands with a butter knife. "Neighbor," Walt said. His voice came in a thin rasp, each word measured against whatever breath he had left. "I need to tell you something, and you're not going to want to hear it." Corey was asleep. His chest rose and fell in the even rhythm of a man who'd taken the evening pain medication. The monitors beeped their count. February sleet tapped the fogged window like someone knocking to be let in. The corridor outside had gone quiet an hour ago. Just the distant nurse station, a phone ringing somewhere, the institutional hum of a building that never fully sleeps. I looked at Walt. "It's late. I know what time it is." He shifted against his pillows. His hospital gown hung loose on his frame, 140 pounds, on a body that used to carry 190. I could see the bones of his shoulders through the fabric. "I've been lying here for 3 days, trying to decide whether to say this." I decided. "Say what?" Walt folded his hands on his lap. The fingers trembled, but the knuckles were fixed, the way a good tool shakes in the grip, but holds its line. He took a breath. The concentrator clicked. "I taught woodshop," he said. "Whitehall Yearling High School. 34 years. Taught 2,000 kids how to measure twice and cut once. Some of them listened." He paused, breathed. The concentrator clicked again. "My wife, Carol, died in 2011. Stroke. She was in the garden pulling weeds, and she went down, and by the time I got to her, she couldn't speak. 3 days in the ICU. Then she was gone." I said nothing. The story had a shape I recognized. It was the shape of my own story, and I didn't want to see where it went. After Carol died, my son Tommy came around more. "Checking on me," he said. "Making sure I was eating. Making sure I was okay." Walt's eyes moved to the ceiling. He was 31, charming kid. Could sell sand in a desert. Had that voice, you know. The one that makes you want to believe. I knew. I sat still in the vinyl chair with Donna's ring between my fingers, and I knew. First time was $500. Tommy said his car needed a transmission. I wrote the check, didn't ask for a receipt. He was my son. Walt's voice dropped. A month later, 1,000. His landlord was threatening eviction. I wrote that check too. 3 months after that, 2,000. Some deal that was going to pay off big. The concentrator clicked. Walt breathed. The deals never paid off. The amounts got bigger. I kept writing checks because every time I said no, he'd get this look. This wounded look. Like I was the one hurting him. And I'd think about Carol. How she always said Tommy just needed more time, more patience. So I'd write the check and tell myself this was the last one. "Mr. Dunmore." Walt. "Walt, I appreciate you sharing this. But my situation isn't. Let me finish." Not a command. A request from a man who didn't have enough breath to waste any of it. "Please." I closed my mouth. Walt's hands moved to the edge of his blanket, smoothing a crease. One morning, I'm eating breakfast, and there's a knock at the door. A man in a suit. He hands me a piece of paper. Eviction notice. For my own house. The house I'd owned for 30 years. The house Carol and I raised Tommy in. He stopped. The monitors beeped. Corey shifted in his sleep. Tommy had forged my signature on a power of attorney. Got it notarized by someone who didn't look too hard at the paperwork. Then he sold the house. My house. $60,000. By the time I got that eviction notice, the money was gone. Every penny. Drugs. Gambling. Gone. I sat in the chair and felt the room contract. The walls moved closer. The ceiling pressed down. Walt's voice filled the space like water filling a pipe, leaving no room for air. I stood in my kitchen holding that paper, and I couldn't understand the words on it. I read it 5 times. Then I drove to the county recorder's office, and they showed me the deed transfer. My name forged, my signature copied. My house sold to a couple from Reynoldsburg who had no idea they were buying stolen property. Walt's eyes came back from the ceiling and found mine. I pressed charges, called the police from the recorder's office parking lot. That was the hardest phone call I ever made. Harder than the funeral home, harder than the oncologist, because when Carol died, I couldn't have saved her. But this I could have stopped. For 6 years, I watched the signs, and I chose not to see them. His hand trembled on the blanket. Tommy got 3 to 5 years. Pickaway Correctional. The judge read the sentence, and Tommy looked at me from across that courtroom. Not angry, not ashamed, relieved. Like he'd been waiting for someone to stop him, and I was the last person he expected it to be. The room was quiet. Just the monitors. Just the sleet. Just the oxygen concentrator measuring out Walt's breath in mechanical clicks. Now I live in a subsidized apartment on East Main Street. 1 bedroom. I've got a recliner, a television sitting on a milk crate, and a bookshelf made out of cinder blocks and planks. That's what's left. After 34 years of teaching and 30 years of mortgage payments. A recliner and a milk crate. Walt leaned forward. The effort cost him. I could see it in the cords of his neck, the set of his jaw, but his eyes were clear. I'm telling you this because I've watched your boy for 3 days now. Stop. The phone calls he silences, the way every sentence starts with look, the way his wife flinches when he moves too fast in the bed. I said, stop. I know what I'm seeing, neighbor, because I saw it for 6 years. And I, his voice broke, chose not to see it. I stood up. The vinyl chair rocked back on its legs. My fists were at my sides, closed tight, the tendons standing out across the backs of my hands. Donna's ring bit into my palm. You don't know my son. My voice came out low, quiet, the same register I used on the plant floor when a welder was about to make a mistake that could kill someone. You don't know anything about my family. Walt didn't move, didn't blink, didn't pull back an inch. He sat there with his oxygen cannula and his taped glasses and his 140-pound frame. A man looks at a house fire, not with fear, with recognition. The bank statement, Walt said, in the bag. The clear plastic bag with his wallet and his keys. He pointed, one trembling finger aimed past me at Corey's side table. I saw the numbers when the nurse set it down. I'm sorry, neighbor, but you need to look. You need to look right now. My hands were shaking. I hadn't noticed when it started. My hands hadn't shaken since the delivery room. Since a nurse asked if I needed to sit down, and I said no, and stood there holding my son. I crossed the room. 3 steps. The clear plastic bag sat where it had been for 3 days. I'd looked at it 100 times. Seen the Shinola watch with its midnight blue dial. Seen the wallet, the keys. Seen the crumpled paper and registered it as nothing. Because looking at nothing was easier than looking at something. The plastic crinkled when I picked it up. The sound filled the room. Louder than the monitors. Louder than the sleet. Louder than 42 hours of lies. I opened the bag and reached past the watch. Past the wallet. My fingers found the paper. Crumpled. Coffee-stained. The paper was cold and stiff, the way documents get when they've been folded and refolded and shoved into pockets. I pulled it out and unfolded it. Fifth Third Bank, checking account statement. 3 months of transactions in small type on standard bank paper. The kind of statement that shows up in the mail and gets filed or thrown away and never looked at again. I looked at it. The bar charges came first. 3 establishments, Names I didn't recognize. Transactions repeating 3-4 times a week. $60. 120. 80. 200. 60 again. 90. 140. Week after week after week, the charges lined up like rivets on a seam. I counted. 14 bar charges in November, 12 in December, 16 in January. A man spending $60 to $200 at bars 3 to 4 times every week for 3 straight months. My eyes moved down the page. Home equity line of credit. Withdrawal. $100,000. $100,000. 6 digits on a single line. Taken against the Westerville house. The house I'd co-signed. The house I'd put my bungalow on Freebus Avenue up as collateral for. The house that held my signature next to my son's on a document Donna had reviewed at her law firm. Below that, payment to Byers, Kessler, and Price, attorneys at law. $8,000. A defense attorney. $8,000. Not a real estate attorney. Not a business attorney. A defense attorney. The kind you call when you're in trouble with the law. Below that, the checking balance. Negative $12,400. Overdraft fees cascading down the remaining lines like water through a cracked joint. $25. $25. $25. 12 times in 3 months. I held the statement in both hands. The paper shook. I read it again. Read it a third time. The numbers didn't change. Numbers don't lie. That's the first thing you learn on a fabrication floor. Measurements don't have opinions. A gap is a gap. A debt is a debt. And $100,000 taken against a house with my name on it is $100,000, whether I want it to be or not. I looked at the Shinola watch still inside the bag. Midnight blue dial. Donna had wrapped it in gold paper and handed it to Corey at the dinner table on his 30th birthday. She'd saved for 3 months. She'd researched the brand. She'd had the back engraved, CSS, make us proud. The watch sat in the same clear plastic as the bank statement. His mother's love and his destruction, sealed together in a bag that anyone could see through. "Dad?" Corey's voice. Rough with sleep. His eyes were open, focused on my hands. On the paper. "Dad, what are you?" Saw the statement. His face went through 3 changes in 2 seconds. First, his eyes widened. The pupils dilated. Then the corners of his mouth pulled up into something that wanted to be a smile, that easy, trained expression he wore when a client raised an objection. Then his jaw set and his brow came down, and the words started. Look, Dad, just stop for a second. That's not even my account. That's a joint account. There's context you're not seeing. Can we not do this here? I'm in a hospital bed, Dad. I almost died. I said nothing. I read the statement again. The bar charges. The $100,000. The defense attorney. Negative $12,400. Dad, seriously. Put that down. That's my private. You can't just go through my stuff. Who told you to look at that? The home equity line, I said. My voice came out at a level I didn't recognize. Below a whisper. Below the threshold of normal speech. Corey stopped talking. Walt's concentrator clicked. The monitors beeped. $100,000. Corey's mouth opened. On the house I co-signed. The words were individual things, separate. Each one placed with the precision of a pipe fitting measured to the 16th. The house I put my home up as collateral for. Dad, that's not. It's a revolving line. It's not like I withdrew it all at once. There's a payment schedule, and the interest rate is... The salesman's voice. Fast. Over-specific. Loaded with details designed to distract. Dates, percentages, payment schedules. revolving lines and amortization tables, and a deal in Powell that was going to close any day. The words came faster and faster, stacking on top of each other, building a wall of noise between the statement in my hands and the truth it contained. And the buyer's thing? That's not what it looks like? Marcus recommended them for a contract dispute with a developer in Hilliard. It's standard in commercial real estate, Dad. You don't understand how. Palm out. Scarred across the base of the thumb from a welding splatter in 2003, calloused at every joint. The hand that had welded pipe joints and built bridge models and signed cosigner documents and held Donna's hand as she died. I need you to stop talking. Right now. Corey stopped. His mouth closed. His eyes went from the statement to my hand, to my face, and back to the statement. His hands twisted the hospital blanket. The Shinola watch was gone from his wrist, in the bag, and without it, he looked incomplete. A man without his costume. I folded the bank statement. 1 fold. 2. I slid it into the inside pocket of the peacoat. The pocket where Donna's ring waited. The paper settled against the fabric next to the gold band, and I felt them both through the wool. The evidence and the love, both warm from my body, both mine now. I stood, put on the peacoat, buttoned it with hands that had stopped shaking. The trembling was gone. Something else had replaced it. Not calm. Something past calm. Something that had been sitting behind 34 years of patience, waiting for the numbers to finally add up wrong. I walked to the door. 6 steps. My red wings on the linoleum sounded like a man leaving a job site for the last time. Your mother used to say, love isn't a feeling. I didn't turn around. It's a decision you make every morning. I let the silence hold. I'm going home to find out what else you've been deciding. Dad. I reached for the door handle. Dad. His voice cracked. Not the salesman's voice. Not the charmer. Not the man who started sentences with look and ended them with lies. This was something underneath all of that. Something younger. Something that remembered being held in the delivery room by hands that shook. Dad, please, don't go. I can explain. I can fix this. Dad. I opened the door. The corridor was empty. Fluorescent lights. Linoleum. The distant sound of a nurse's station phone. The air was cooler out here, and it smelled like nothing. I walked through the door and didn't look back. Behind me, my son called my name twice more. Each time, the word got smaller. I kept walking. My boots hit the floor in an even rhythm. Left, right, down the corridor. Past the nurse's station, where a woman in blue scrubs looked up and looked down. Into the elevator. The doors closed, and the sound of my name, still coming from that room, cut off. I stood in the elevator with my hand in my pocket, the ring on one side, the folded statement on the other. The diamond bit into my thumb. The paper edge bit into my forefinger. I held them both. The floor numbers counted down. 3, 2, 1. The mechanical hum of the cables filled the small space, and in the silence between floors, I could feel the weight of what I'd just done settling into my body, the way concrete sets into a form. The lobby was empty. A security guard nodded from behind his desk. I pushed through the glass doors, and the February air hit my face, and I breathed it in. Cold. Clean. Sharp as a measurement that finally matches. Back in the room, the beige curtain moved. Walt's hand found the fabric and pulled it closed between the 2 beds. The rings scraped the rod. Slow. Measured. Then the scraping of butter knife on tongue depressor resumed. A new animal. Something that would take shape over hours of patient, precise cuts. Sleet streaked across the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. The defroster pushed warm air against the glass, and the outside world blurred and cleared and blurred again. I drove south on High Street with both hands on the wheel, the same route I'd taken north 2 days ago, and nothing looked the same. The bank statement sat in my inside coat pocket. I could feel its edge against my chest. On the other side of the same pocket, Donna's ring. The paper and the gold rode against each other with every breath I took. The bungalow on Phoebus Avenue was dark. I'd left at 2:30 in the morning, and it was past 1 now. 23 hours. The porch light was off because I hadn't thought to turn it on. The street light at the corner threw a yellow wash across the front yard. The brick looked black in the rain. I parked in the driveway, sat in the truck. The engine ticked as it cooled. Rain drummed the roof. My hands were on my thighs, and they were still. No trembling. Whatever had been shaking inside me at the hospital had set into something harder. The front door stuck on the weather strip, the way it did every February when the wood swelled. I shouldered it open and stepped into the dark. The house smelled of pipe solder and lavender. Donna's sachets. She'd kept them in every drawer, every closet, every linen shelf. 2 years, and they still held. I didn't turn on the lights, didn't take off my boots, didn't hang the peacoat. I walked through the living room by memory, my red wings tracking wet prints across the carpet, and went straight to the master bedroom. The bed was made, left side rumpled where I'd thrown back the covers at 2:14 that morning. Right side smooth. Donna's side. The depression in the mattress, where she'd slept for 36 years, had never quite filled back in. On her nightstand, her reading glasses caught the streetlight coming through the blinds. Wire rims, tortoiseshell accents, exactly where she'd set them down 2 years ago. I dropped to my knees beside the bed. The carpet was thin here, worn down by years of footsteps. My kneecaps hit the floor, and the jolt traveled up my spine. I reached under the bed frame, my arm flat against the carpet, fingers searching until they found the hard edge of metal. The sentry-safe fireproof box. 8 inches by 10 inches by 4 inches deep. Gray steel with a key lock. Donna had bought it at Office Depot the year we got married. She kept everything in it. Birth certificates, marriage license, the deed to the house, tax returns. She'd added documents over the decades the way I added bridges to the workshop shelves. One at a time, each one in its place. I hadn't opened it since she died. She'd told me to. Her last week, when she could still form sentences between the morphine doses. Check the fireproof box under the bed if anything ever goes wrong with Corey. I'd said nothing would go wrong. She'd looked at me with those brown eyes, the same eyes she'd given our son, and said, "Promise me you'll check." The key was on my keyring. 3rd from the left. A small brass key I'd carried for 2 years without using. It slid into the lock and turned with a click that sounded louder than it should have in the empty room. I lifted the lid. The documents were organized, the way Donna organized everything. Tabbed manila folders with handwritten labels in her crisp block print. Mortgage original, cosigner addendum. Financial agreements. Corey. Tax returns, 2020-2024. Each folder straight-edged and aligned. She'd used a ruler for the labels. Even her filing system was precise. The yellow legal pad paper sat on top of everything else. One sheet, folded once. I saw the handwriting before I unfolded it. Donna's block print. Blue ink. The kind of pen she kept in a cup on the kitchen counter. Always 3 of them. Always blue. I unfolded the note. 3 lines. 23 words. My wife's voice from 2 years in the ground. "Ray, if you ever need these, I'm sorry I was right. Make him do better. Love, D." The room went silent. Not the regular silence of an empty house at 1 in the morning. A different kind. The kind where the air stops moving and the world contracts to the size of a piece of paper in your hands. "I'm sorry I was right." She knew. Before the diagnosis. before the cancer, before any of it. Donna had looked at our son and seen something I refused to see. She'd gone to her law firm's real estate attorney and built a protection into the mortgage documents. She'd filed it in a fireproof box under the bed. She'd told me to check it. And then she'd died. And I'd spent 2 years not checking because checking meant admitting she had reason to worry. I sat on the edge of the bed. My boots left wet marks on the carpet. The note sat in my left hand. Donna's ring came out of my pocket and into my right. I held them both, the paper and the gold. Her words and her promise. I sat there and I didn't move. 20 minutes. Maybe longer. I didn't check the clock. The rain hit the window in waves. The furnace kicked on, and the vents breathed warm air across the room. Donna's glasses sat on the nightstand, 6 inches from my elbow. And I could feel her in this room, the way you feel, the heat from a pipe that was soldered hours ago. Gone, but still warm. I set down the ring and the note. Reached for the glasses. The wire frames were cold. I turned them over in my hands. The tortoiseshell accents had faded slightly at the temples where she'd gripped them to slide them on. I opened the arms and put them on my face. The room sharpened. The fine print on the note jumped into clarity. The edges of the manila folders became knife-cut. The stitching on the bedspread resolved into individual threads. Her prescription was almost the same as mine. I picked up the folder labeled Cosigner Addendum and opened it. Legal paper. Dense type. Paragraph numbers running down the left margin. The language was the kind I'd skimmed 4 years ago at the kitchen table, while Donna sat beside me with a red pen. She'd read every word. I'd trusted that she had, and signed where the tabs indicated. Now I read it. Every word. The standard cosigner provisions filled the first 3 pages. Liability. Default terms. Foreclosure procedures. Page 4 introduced the addendum itself, a separate document attached to the primary mortgage agreement. The header read, Supplemental Cosigner Protection Clause, Addendum A. Below it, in smaller type, drafted by Alan Marsh, ISQ, Reinhardt and Associates, on behalf of cosigner Raymond E. Strickland. Alan Marsh, Donna's firm. She'd had her own attorney draft this. I read the clause. Section 4B. Encumbrance restriction. If the primary borrower encumbers the secured property with additional liens, lines of credit, home equity instruments, or secondary mortgages without the prior written consent of the cosigner shall have the right to demand accelerated repayment of the primary mortgage obligation, or compel a sale of the secured property to satisfy all outstanding obligations, with proceeds distributed according to standard priority of claims. I read it twice more. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was a pipe schematic I could read with my eyes closed. If Corey added debt to the house without my written permission, I could force him to pay up or sell. The $100,000 home equity line. Taken without telling me, without telling Jess, without written consent from anyone. Donna had seen this coming. Not the specific numbers, not the bars and the whiskey and the defense attorneys, but the pattern, the borrowing that never stopped, the promises that never held. She'd watched our son the way she watched contracts at the firm. She'd found the weak joint before it failed, and she'd built a tool to fix it. I closed the folder and held it against my chest. Donna's glasses sat on my nose. Donna's note sat on the bed. Donna's claws sat in my hands. My wife was dead, and she was still protecting me. I took off the glasses and set them back on the nightstand, exactly where she'd left them. The morning came gray and cold. I made coffee in the kitchen, set 1 mug on the counter, started to reach for the second mug, Donna's mug, the blue one with the chipped handle. Stopped, pulled my hand back. I pulled the crumpled bank statement from the peacoat pocket and laid it on the table next to the cosigner addendum. The two documents side by side. The disease and the cure. I called Pete Aguilar at 7:15. He answered on the second ring. Strick. How's the boy? Pete, I need some time. Couple of days, maybe a week. He didn't ask why. Didn't ask how long. 30 years at the plant. A man who understood that some problems don't come with timelines. Take whatever you need, Strick. The crew's got it. I appreciate that. He's going to be all right? I held the phone. Looked at the folder on the kitchen table. The cosigner addendum. The mortgage papers. Donna's note. I'm working on it. I called Grant Medical Center next. Asked for the social services department. A receptionist transferred me. 2 rings. Social services. This is Sandra Foley. Mrs. Foley, my name is Ray Strickland. My son Corey was admitted 2 days ago after a vehicle accident. I need a full financial assessment. Everything he owes, to everyone. Pause. Not the hesitation of someone deciding whether to help. The pause of someone who has heard this request before, in different words, from different fathers and mothers and wives, and knows what comes next. Mr. Strickland, I can meet you this afternoon, 2 o'clock. Bring whatever documentation you have. I'll be there. I drove back to the hospital, parked in the same garage, took the elevator to the 2nd floor instead of the 3rd. Sandra Foley's office was in the east wing, down a corridor that smelled like printer toner and warm dust from the heating vents. Her door was open. She stood from behind a desk covered in manila folders and extended her hand. She was in her 50s. Reading glasses hung on a beaded chain around her neck. Her handshake was firm and brief. The grip of someone who spent her days delivering numbers that broke people and had learned not to linger in the contact. Sit down, Mr. Strickland. I sat. She sat. I set the cosigner addendum folder on her desk. Tell me what you know. I told her what the bank statement showed, the bar charges, the $100,000 home equity line, the $8,000 defense attorney, the negative balance. I told her about the co-signed mortgage, the $340,000 obligation with my bungalow as additional collateral. I told her about the $40,000 I'd lent him for the startup and the $5,000 for the closing that never existed. Sandra listened. She put on her reading glasses and picked up a yellow legal pad. The same kind of pad Donna used for her note. Blue ink, block print. She wrote as I talked, categorizing each number into columns without asking me to slow down. When I finished, she said, "That's what you know. Now let me show you what you don't." She turned to her computer. She'd already pulled records. Corey had authorized the hospital to access his financial information as part of the admission process. A standard form buried in the stack of paperwork nobody reads in an emergency room. 3 credit cards, Sandra said, writing on the pad. Capital 1, balance, $18,400. Chase Sapphire. Balance, $14,200. And a Discover card. She looked at me over her reading glasses. The Discover card was opened 11 months ago. His wife isn't listed on it. Balance, $7,400. A secret card. Opened a month before Donna's 1-year anniversary. My hand found the ring in my pocket. Total credit card debt, $40,000 even. She wrote the number. The home equity line of credit, $100,000, as you saw on the statement. I reviewed the application. The spousal consent form has your daughter-in-law's signature on it. Jess didn't know about it. Sandra's pen stopped. If that signature was obtained without her knowledge or consent, that's forgery, a separate legal issue. She wrote a note in the margin and continued. Commission advances from his brokerage. Corey received advances against future deal closings, totaling $80,000 over the past 14 months. Standard practice in commercial real estate. The problem is that none of those deals closed. The advances are now personal debt owed back to the firm. $80,000 borrowed against work he never did. Against deals he told me were about to hit. I sat in my chair and my hands went flat on the armrests and stayed there. Bar tabs, Sandra said. 3 establishments in the Columbus area. Running tabs paid sporadically. Combined outstanding balance, $4,200. Individual charges ranging from $60 to $200, 3 to 4 times per week over 8 months. She turned the page on her legal pad. Retainer payment to the law firm of Byers, Kessler, and Price, $8,000. Paid 8 months ago. She looked at me. That's a criminal defense firm, Mr. Strickland. They specialize in DUI cases. 8 months. A DUI 8 months ago that nobody in the family knew about. While I was building bridge models in my garage and visiting Donna's grave on Sundays and telling myself, every family has rough patches. Medical bills, Sandra continued. Gerald Fossey. The pedestrian injured in Tuesday's accident. Broken pelvis, currently in our orthopedic wing. Initial treatment costs are being billed to your son's auto insurance, but the policy limits may not cover the full extent. Mr. Fossey is 52. He works at a distribution warehouse. A broken pelvis is 3 to 6 months of recovery. The man my son hit was in the same building, floors away, lying in a bed of his own with a broken pelvis because my son drove drunk at 2 in the morning. And the last items. Sandra's pen moved across the pad. 2 payday loans, taken 6 weeks ago. Combined principal, $3,800. Interest rate, 400% APR. 400%. The kind of interest that doubles your debt in 3 months. The kind of loan you take when every valve has failed and you're cutting into the main line just to keep pressure. Sandra set down her pen. She turned the legal pad so I could read it. The numbers ran down the page in her neat columns, categorized and totaled. At the bottom, underlined twice, $280,000. $280,000. My son owed $280,000 to banks and credit card companies, and his brokerage and bars and lawyers and payday lenders, and the man whose pelvis he'd broken. I stared at the number. My jaw tightened. My hands stayed flat on the armrests. The number sat there on the yellow paper, and it didn't move, and it didn't change. Sandra waited. She'd done this before. She knew the silence that followed this number. She knew it lasted as long as it lasted, and there was nothing to do but let it. The addendum, I said. My voice came out flat. Controlled. The voice I used when I read measurements that were off by a 1/4 inch on a project that couldn't afford to be off by a 1/16. The co-signer protection clause. Is it enforceable? Sandra picked up the folder I'd brought. She read the clause, turning pages with the same methodical care she'd used on the legal pad. 2 minutes. 3. She set it down. I'm not an attorney, Mr. Strickland, but I've seen co-signer disputes in this office for 15 years, and this clause is well drafted. The home equity line your son opened without your written consent appears to trigger it. I'd recommend you consult with a real estate attorney. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a business card. Ellen Navarro. She handles exactly this kind of case. Tell her I sent you. I took the card, put it in my coat pocket next to the ring and the bank statement. The pocket was getting full. Thank you. Sandra folded her hands on the desk. Mr. Strickland, the debt is bad, but the criminal exposure is what should concern you most. I've spoken with our patient advocate regarding Mr. Fossey's case. Aggravated vehicular assault is a 3rd-degree felony in Ohio. 1 to 5 years. And if your son has a prior DUI, that prior makes everything worse. I nodded. I picked up the addendum folder. I walked out of Sandra Foley's office, carrying $280,000 worth of truth on a yellow legal pad and a business card that might save my house. I drove home, made coffee, spread Donna's files across the kitchen table. The cosigner addendum, the mortgage papers, Sandra's legal pad with the numbers, the crumpled bank statement, Donna's note in the center. I sat there and I waited for the phone to ring. The phone rang at 8:40 that evening. The screen showed Jess's number. Her voice was different. The qualifiers were gone. No, I think, or maybe, or I'm not sure if this is my place. She used my name. Not Dad. My name. Ray. I need to tell you something, and I need you to not interrupt me, because if you interrupt me, I'm going to lose my nerve, and I can't lose my nerve again. I set down my coffee. I'm listening. She talked for 22 minutes. I know because the microwave clock read 8042 when she started and 9004 when she paused for the first time. The drinking started 3 months after Donna's funeral, she said. Social at first. A bourbon after dinner. 2 bourbons. Then bourbon before dinner. Then bourbon in the morning, disguised in a coffee thermos that he carried to the office. She paused. I smelled it on his breath when he kissed Lily goodnight, and I told myself I was imagining things. The first credit card statement showed up 4 months ago. She told me she found it in his briefcase when she was looking for Lily's soccer schedule. Capital One, $1,200 in bar charges in a single month. She confronted him. He cried. He said it was a one-time thing. He said the stress of losing his mother had gotten to him. He promised to stop. He held her face in his hands and looked her in the eyes and said, I'll do better. 3 weeks later, I found the Chase Sapphire statement in the glove compartment of his truck, Jess said. $6,000. She confronted him again. He cried again. Promised again. This time, he got angry first. Said she was controlling. Said she didn't trust him. Said if she really loved him, she'd give him space to grieve. By the time the conversation ended, she was apologizing to him. The home equity documents appeared in the mail 2 months ago. $100,000. Against the house. Her signature on the consent form, except it wasn't her signature. She could see the differences. The J in Jess was wrong. The loop on the S was backward. Someone had traced it from a canceled check or a Christmas card. I sat in the kitchen holding that form, Jess said. Her voice was steady but thin, like wire pulled taut. And I knew everything was worse than he'd told me. I knew the drinking was worse. I knew the money was worse. And I knew that every time he cried and promised, it was a performance. She'd started moving money, $50 from the grocery budget, $80 from the household account. Small amounts that wouldn't show. Huntington Bank. An account in her name only. $3,200 in 4 months. Not enough to start over. Enough to prove she was thinking about it. The copies went into a manila envelope, every statement, every collection notice, every document she found. She kept the envelope in her locker at Dr. Kimball's dental office in Gahanna. In Gahanna, because the locker had a combination lock, and Corey didn't know the combination. The BAC was .14, she said. The hospital social worker told me. I'm his emergency contact. They're required to disclose. She told me about Gerald Fossey, the pedestrian, broken pelvis, walking to the Speedway gas station on the shoulder of 35 at 2 in the morning. A 52-year-old warehouse worker who was in the wrong place when my son drifted across the median. The Franklin County prosecutor is reviewing charges, Jess said. Aggravated vehicular assault. 3rd-degree felony. 1 to 5 years. It's worse because of the prior DUI. The prior DUI, I said. 8 months ago, he hired Byers, Kessler, and Price, paid them $8,000 from our savings. I didn't know until I found the receipt. The kitchen was quiet. Rain hit the windows. The furnace hummed. Donna's files lay spread across the table like evidence in a case I'd been the last one called to testify in. "How long have you known?" I asked. She was quiet for 3 seconds. 4. 4 months for the money. 6 months for the drinking. Her breath caught, a sound like fabric tearing. And I carried it because I thought that's what love was. But it's not. It's just cowardice with a nicer name. She cried then, not loud. The phone picked up the sound of breathing that couldn't decide whether to be a sob or a sentence. I listened. There was nothing to say that would make those 6 months weigh less. "Thank you, Jess." "Ray." "Yeah." "What are you going to do?" What Donna would have done. What she already did. I hung up. Sat at the table for a long time. The coffee was cold. The files covered every inch of available surface. Sandra's yellow legal pad with $280,000, underlined twice. The co-signer addendum with Donna's clause. The business card for Ellen Navarro, real estate attorney. The note in Donna's handwriting. Make him do better. I gathered the files, stacked them, squared the edges, put them back in the SentrySafe box, locked it, slid it under the bed. Then I walked to the garage. The workshop was cold. I hadn't turned on the space heater. The overhead fluorescent buzzed and flickered twice before catching. The 11 bridges sat on their walnut shelves. Golden Gate, Brooklyn, Roebling suspension. 9 others. Brass and copper catching the light. Years of work, years of patience. Every joint fitted and soldered by hand. The Ponte Vecchio sat on the workbench where it had been sitting for 2 years. 3 arches soldered. The 4th drawn on paper, measured, cut. A thin green patina on the solder joints where oxidation had crept in. 2 years of dust on the base plate. My soldering iron lay beside it. Cold. The tip had oxidized too, turned a dull gray where it used to be bright silver. The cord was coiled neatly because I always coiled my cords. Even when I was putting down a tool I didn't think I'd pick up again. I picked it up, not to solder, just to hold it. I felt the weight of it, 12 ounces. Comfortable grip. The handle was worn smooth, where my fingers had held it for 20 years of bridge building. The tool fit my hand, the way Donna's ring fit my pocket. Something I'd carried so long it had shaped itself to me. In my left hand, I held the cosigner addendum, Donna's weapon, the clause she'd built in a law office while I was building bridges in a garage. Both of us working with our hands. Both of us building things designed to hold. The garage was cold and quiet. February wind pressed against the windows and rattled the weather stripping on the door. The space heater sat in the corner, unplugged, waiting. The Ponte Vecchio waited on the bench, half finished, the 4th arch still just a shape on paper. The smell of old flux and cold metal filled the space. I held the soldering iron and remembered what it felt like to build something instead of watching it fall apart. Walt was sitting up when I came through the door. His menagerie had grown. A new shape sat in his palm, still rough at the edges. The oxygen concentrator clicked its count beside him. The thick glasses caught the overhead light. "Neighbor," he said, "you look like a man with a plan." I pulled the chair to his bedside. "I'm going to see my son today." Walt nodded. His fingers turned the small shape over. A turtle. 4 stubby legs, a domed shell carved with crosshatch marks, a head stretched forward as if pushing through something heavy. He'd used 2 tongue depressors, laminated together with what looked like hospital-grade adhesive. The detail was finer than anything else on his bedside table. "Made this for you," Walt said. He held it out. His hand shook, But the turtle didn't fall. Slow and steady, neighbor. That's how you win this. I took it. The wood was warm from his hands. Light. The weight of nothing. But the grooves in the shell were precise, cut by a man who'd spent 40 years teaching precision to teenagers with sharp tools and short attention spans. Thank you, Walt. He leaned back against his pillows. The effort of sitting up had cost him. I could see it in the cords of his neck, the way his chest worked harder under the gown. The oxygen concentrator clicked between his breaths, measuring out what he had left. You going to be all right? I asked. I'm transferring to a rehab place next week. Sunrise. East Broad Street. He tried a smile. It didn't quite form. Got a window, they tell me, overlooking a courtyard. Nobody sits in it this time of year, but it's there. I'll come visit. Bring the girl, the little one with the braids. I'll make her something. I stood, pocketed the turtle. It sat beside Donna's ring, 2 small weights against my thigh. Walt. Yeah, you saved me a lot of years. His watery eyes held mine through the taped glasses. I didn't save you anything. I just told you what the clock said. You decided to listen. I left Grant Medical Center for the last time. The lobby doors opened onto February air, and I breathed it in and walked to my truck. At home, I went straight to the garage. The overhead fluorescent buzzed. The 11 bridges sat on their walnut shelves. I took the carved turtle from my pocket and set it on the shelf next to the golden gate. Wood among brass and copper. Walt's patience next to Donna's legacy. Then I built my folder. The leather portfolio had been Donna's. She'd carried it to the law firm every day for 22 years. Brown leather, brass zipper, her initials embossed on the lower right corner, DMS. I'd found it in the hall closet last night behind a stack of old coats. The leather still smelled like her desk at the firm. I opened it on the kitchen table. The cosigner addendum went in first, page 7 flagged with a yellow tab. Sandra Foley's debt summary on the yellow legal pad went second. Sandra had called Tuesday. The prosecutor's office had filed. She had the summary. That went third. Each document in order. Each one a load-bearing joint in the structure I was about to build. Sandra had also recommended Mary Haven, 28-day inpatient. She'd made the call herself. I looked out the kitchen window at the bungalow's front yard. 1,400 square feet of brick. Donna's lavender bushes dormant under the snow. The house we'd bought in 1986 for $47,000 and paid off with 22 years of on-time checks. The house I'd put up as collateral for my son's mortgage. If Corey defaulted, Fifth Third Bank would take this house. The workshop, the 11 bridges, the Ponte Vecchio. Donna's reading glasses on the nightstand. Everything we'd built, gone. Because I'd signed a piece of paper and trusted my son. I zipped the portfolio shut and called Corey. Dad. His voice was careful, testing the temperature. I was going to call you. Family meeting. Your house. 4 o'clock. You and Jess. Dad. That's great. I've been thinking, and I've got some ideas about how we can... He heard what he wanted to hear. Yeah. Okay. Good. I'll tell Jess. We'll order pizza or something. No pizza. A pause. Right. Okay. 4 o'clock. I hung up. Called Jess. She answered on the first ring. Lily's at my parents' house in Dublin, she said. No greeting. She'd been waiting. Good. Ray, I'm ready. I know you are. I have the envelope. Bring it. Before I left, I walked to the bedroom. Donna's reading glasses sat on the nightstand where she'd left them 26 months ago. Wire rims, tortoiseshell accents. I picked them up and put them on. Today, I needed her eyes. I drove to Westerville at 3:30. The sleet had stopped, but the sky stayed the same flat gray it had been all week. The Brookfield Estates subdivision looked like every other suburban development in central Ohio. Two-story houses set back from the road, landscaped medians, streetlights with decorative wrought iron bases. The kind of neighborhood where everything matches and nobody asks questions. Corey's house sat on a corner lot. The colonial revival. 3-car garage. Bay windows. The kind of house that says something about the people who live in it. What it said now was different from what Corey intended. The yard hadn't been shoveled in weeks. Snow packed into ridges along the walkway where footprints had frozen and refrozen. One car in the driveway, Jess's Honda. The garage door was down. Of the 3 bays, I knew only one held a vehicle. Corey's truck had been totaled in the wreck. The gutter over the garage had pulled loose at one end, hanging at an angle. Details I hadn't noticed in January, or hadn't wanted to notice. A downspout was disconnected, and a stain of mineral deposits ran down the brick where water had been sheeting for months. I could have fixed all of it in a weekend. Nobody had asked. Jess opened the front door before I knocked. She wore a gray sweater and jeans. Her hair was down, which was different. Her green eyes were clear. No concealer. She'd stopped covering the dark circles. She held the manila envelope against her chest with both arms. "He's upstairs," she said. "Changing." The dining room was through the foyer, past a living room with furniture I didn't recognize. Leather sofa, glass coffee table, a flat-screen television the size of a small billboard. All of it bought on credit, I now understood. The dining room table was oak. 6 chairs, a chandelier overhead that threw warm light on the surface. Jess had cleared the mail to one side of the table, stacked in a neat pile. Envelopes. Flyers. Collection notices with red borders visible through the windowed fronts. She'd organized them by size. Her coping mechanism. Order imposed on wreckage. I set the leather portfolio on the table, sat down, took off my peacoat, and folded it over the back of the chair. Donna's reading glasses stayed on my face. Jess sat across from me. She placed the manila envelope flat on the table in front of her, hands folded over it. Her wedding ring hung loose, the way it had at the hospital. She'd lost more weight since then. She didn't speak, neither did I. The house was quiet except for the forced air heating pushing through the vents and the muffled sound of movement upstairs. I looked at Jess. She looked at me. 2 people who had both spent months choosing silence and had both, independently, decided that silence was no longer something they could afford. Footsteps on the stairs. Corey came down in wrinkled khakis and a Brooks Brothers shirt, untucked, top button undone. The Shinola watch on his left wrist. Donna's gift. The midnight blue dial caught the overhead light. He'd combed his hair, shaved. The bruise on his cheekbone had faded from purple to a yellow-green that he couldn't hide. He was trying to look like everything was fine. It wasn't working. The khakis had a stain on the right thigh. The shirt collar was frayed. But the watch was polished. He'd cleaned the watch. "Dad," he smiled. The salesman's smile. Warm. Inviting. The face that closed the Grandview deal. "Listen, I'm glad we're doing this. I've been doing a lot of thinking in the hospital, and I've got a plan. There's a deal in Grandview that I've been working on, and—" I unzipped the leather portfolio. The brass zipper sounded loud in the dining room. Corey stopped mid-sentence. His eyes tracked my hands as I pulled out the first document, the mortgage addendum. I turned it to page 7, where the yellow tab marked the clause. I set it on the table and pushed it across the oak surface toward my son. Page 7. Read clause 4B. Corey's mouth stayed open for a second. Then it closed. He looked at the document. He looked at me. He looked at Jess, who sat with her hands folded and her face still. He picked up the addendum. The paper shook in his grip. I watched his eyes move across the page, left to right, line by line. I could see the moment the words landed. His jaw went slack. The color left his face starting at his forehead and moving down like water draining from a pipe. "This is," he started. "Section 4B, I said. Encumbrance restriction. If the primary borrower adds liens, lines of credit, or secondary mortgages to the secured property without the cosigner's written consent, the cosigner can demand accelerated repayment or compel a sale." I kept my voice level, the same register I used on the fabrication floor when reading specifications to a crew. No heat, no emphasis, just the measurements. "You opened a $100,000 home equity line on this house. You didn't ask me. You didn't tell me. You didn't get my written consent. That's a breach. Under this clause, I have the legal right to force the sale of this house." Corey set the document down. His hands left damp prints on the paper. "Dad, that clause that can't be enforceable. No bank would. Your mother had it drafted by Allen Marsh at Reinhardt and Associates. I've had it reviewed by a real estate attorney this week. It's enforceable." Jess lifted her manila envelope. She opened the flap. Inside, a stack of documents, an inch thick. She pulled them out and set them on the table one at a time. Each one placed flat. Each one positioned so Corey could read the headers. Capital 1 Statement. $18,400. Her voice was flat, the same voice she used to read X-ray findings to patients. Cavity counts. Damage assessment. Chase Sapphire. 14,200. Discover card. Opened 11 months ago without my knowledge. 7,400. She pulled the next document. Home equity line of credit application. $100,000. She turned it toward Corey. My signature on the spousal consent form. Except I didn't sign it. The J is wrong. The loop on the S is backward. You traced it, Corey. Corey's eyes moved from the document to Jess, to me and back. His mouth worked. Jess. Those are out of context. You don't understand how a revolving credit line works in commercial real. Jess pulled the next page. Retainer receipt. Buyers, Kessler, and Price. $8,000. Criminal defense attorneys. Paid 8 months ago. That was a contract dispute, I told you, Marcus recommended. Collection notices. 3 more pages. Red bordered envelopes, opened and flattened. Payday loans. 2 of them. 400% a PR. Corey's chair scraped backward. He stood. His hands gripped the edge of the table. Why are you doing this? Both of you. I just got out of the hospital. I almost died, and you're sitting here with files and... Dad, she's exaggerating. She doesn't understand the market right now. If you'd just let me explain. I pulled Sandra Foley's yellow legal pad from the portfolio and set it on the table. The numbers ran down the page in Sandra's neat columns. Credit cards, $40,000. Home equity line, $100,000. Brokerage advances, $80,000. Bar tabs, $4,200. Attorney retainer, $8,000. Medical bills, estimated. Payday loans, $3,800. Miscellaneous, $3,800. At the bottom, underlined twice, circled once in red, $280,000. Corey stared at the number. The room was quiet. I placed the last document. The Franklin County Prosecutor's Case File Summary. 1 page. Typed. Official header. The charges laid out in legal language that didn't need a law degree to understand. Aggravated vehicular assault. 3rd-degree felony. Ohio Revised Code 2993.08. Prior DUI offense noted. Sentencing range. 1 to 5 years imprisonment. Victim. Gerald Fossey, age 52, broken pelvis, projected recovery, 3-6 months. The blood left Corey's face. What little color remained in his cheeks vanished. He looked like the men I'd seen at the plant after bad falls. The shock before the pain hits. How did you? Your mother was smarter than both of us put together. Corey sat down. The chair caught him. He stared at the table covered in documents. 4 years of deception laid out in columns and clauses and case file numbers. His hands were flat on the oak, fingers spread, the Shinola watch ticking against the wood. I let the silence hold. 10 seconds. 15. The heating vents pushed warm air through the room. Outside, a car passed on the street. Normal sounds. A normal Saturday in a house that was about to stop being Corey's. Here are the terms, I said. Corey looked up. You enter inpatient rehabilitation. Maryhaven Treatment Center. 28-day program. This is not a discussion. His mouth opened. I kept going. This house goes on the market. Monday. The proceeds pay off the home equity line first, then reduce the secured debt. Whatever's left goes into a repayment fund that Sandra Foley will administer. You can't sell my house. Read the clause again. His mouth closed. You and Jess move into the bungalow on Phoebus Avenue while you complete treatment. Lily keeps her school enrollment. Jess keeps her job. Jess's hands tightened on the table. She hadn't known this part. Her eyes glistened, but she said nothing. I take over your finances. Every dollar accounted for. Every debt on a structured repayment plan. No access to credit. No borrowing. Not from banks, not from friends, not from payday lenders. Corey's jaw worked back and forth. The teeth grinding reflex I'd seen in the hospital bed. And you cooperate with the Franklin County prosecutor. You accept responsibility for what you did to Gerald Fossey. You plead guilty. You face whatever the court decides. Dad, if you refuse any of these terms, I invoke the clause. I force the sale. And I walk away. No more cosigns. No more checks. No more $45,000 that disappears into bar tabs and payday loans. You deal with the bank, the brokerage, the prosecutor, and the courts on your own. The overhead light hummed. The heating vent ticked. I'm not abandoning you. I'm refusing to let you abandon yourself. There's a difference. Corey stood again. The chair hit the wall behind him. Color climbed his neck. His hands came off the table and balled at his sides. You can't do this. This is my house. I worked for this. I built this. You built $280,000 in debt and a felony charge. I'm your son. You're my son. That's why I'm doing this. The words landed like a door closing. Corey stood with his hands at his sides, chest rising and falling. His eyes were wet, but the tears hadn't fallen. Not yet. These weren't the practice tears. The ones he'd used on Jess. The ones that came with promises and deflection. These were something else. Stuck behind whatever wall he'd built to hold them. This isn't fair, he said. His voice cracked on the second word. You don't know what it's been like. After Mom died, I couldn't. Everything just. I know what it's been like. I was there too. I lost her too. Corey's mouth twisted. His hands came up to his face and pressed against his eyes. I'm going to lose everything, he said through his fingers. You already lost it, Corey. I'm trying to help you stop digging. His hands dropped. He looked at the table, the addendum, the debt summary, the prosecutor's case file, the credit card statements and collection notices and payday loan documents spread across the oak surface like a map of his own destruction. And in the center of it, Sandra Foley's yellow legal pad with the number $280,000 circled in red. Jess sat across the table. Tears ran down her cheeks in 2 straight lines. She made no sound. Her right thumb worked at the skin beside her thumbnail. Pinch and pull. A thin line of blood at the cuticle. But she didn't look away from Corey. She held his gaze. Corey's knees buckled. Not a dramatic collapse. Just a slow folding, the way a man sits when his legs stop holding him. He dropped into the chair. His elbows hit the table. His forehead hit his forearms. The Shinola watch pressed against the oak. The midnight blue dial facing up. The second hand sweeping its small circle. Donna's gift, ticking against the wood. He cried. Not the rehearsed tears. Something that came from a deeper place. The place where a man keeps the things he can't look at. His shoulders shook. The sounds were raw and broken and ugly. The kind of sounds that strip a person down to whatever they were before they learned to pretend. I sat across from my son, shoulders back, hands flat on the table. Donna's glasses on my face, reflecting the overhead light. I could feel the carved turtle in my pocket pressing against my thigh next to the ring. I didn't reach for him. My hands stayed on the oak, because reaching for him now, before the terms were accepted, would be the same thing I'd been doing his whole life. Making it easier, and easy was what had brought us to this table, with $280,000 in documents between us. The crying slowed. Corey's breathing evened. His face stayed on his arms. The dining room was quiet, except for the heating vents and the distant sound of a neighbor's garage door closing. When he spoke, his voice was muffled against his sleeves. Small, stripped of the salesman's polish, the charmer's warmth, the liar's confidence. Just a voice. His voice. The one I hadn't heard since he was a boy. Okay, Dad, okay. The doors at Maryhaven Treatment Center were heavy steel with wired glass panels. Corey stood on the threshold in jeans and a sweatshirt I'd lent him because his clothes were still at the Westerville house. The sweatshirt was mine from Buckeye steel, dark blue with the company logo faded to a ghost across the chest. It hung loose on his frame. He turned and looked at me across the parking lot. 20 yards of wet asphalt between us. His mouth opened, closed. He raised one hand. Not a wave, just his palm, held up for a second, the way you hold up a hand to say, wait, or stop, or, I'm sorry, depending on the context. I raised mine back. The intake nurse touched his elbow. He turned, walked through the doors. The steel frames closed behind him, and the wired glass caught the morning light. And I stood in the parking lot and listened to my truck engine tick as it cooled. February 19th, 9 days since the wreck, 4 days since the dining room table. I drove home. The first call came at 6:47 p.m. that same evening. You forced me into this. His voice was tight, controlled anger, the kind that sits in your jaw. You and Jess, you ambushed me. You sat there with your files and your clauses, and you didn't give me a choice. Are you doing the work? Silence. They have me in group therapy with a bunch of people who... Are you doing the work? Yes. Good. I'll be here. I hung up. Made dinner, scrambled eggs and toast. Sat at the kitchen table where Donna's files had been spread 4 days ago. The table was clean now. Just the salt shaker and the napkin holder and a placemat Donna had bought at a craft fair in German Village. Roosters on a blue background. The second call came the next morning. 7:15 a.m. I was lacing my Red Wings in the bedroom. Dad, different voice. Smaller. I couldn't sleep. They make you share a room. The guy next to me talks in his sleep. I miss Lily. I know. Do you think she's okay? She's okay. Tell her I love her. I will. Dad, yeah, I know you're right. About all of it. I know. Good. I'll be here. The calls continued. Every evening that first week. Sometimes angry, sometimes raw, sometimes both in the same 3 minutes. By Thursday, he stopped needing me to ask. I'm doing the work, Dad. he said before I could get the question out. Group in the morning. Individual at 2. I'm doing it. I kept them short. Not because I didn't care. Because short was what held. Long conversations left room for negotiation. And this wasn't a negotiation. The Westerville house went on the market on a Monday. I hired Karen Voss, a realtor Jess's mother knew through her years in the Dublin school district. Not from Corey's brokerage. That was deliberate. Karen walked the property on a gray morning in late February, clipboard in hand, and I walked with her. The gutters need work. That disconnected downspout has been sheeting water down the brick for at least 6 months. You've got mineral staining and possible moisture damage underneath. She made a note. The yard hasn't been maintained. Snow damage on the ornamental shrubs. The lawn underneath is going to come up patchy. We went inside. The kitchen still had dishes in the sink from the morning Jess and Lily left. Karen opened cabinets, checked fixtures, ran water in every faucet. The house itself is solid, she said. Good bones. But deferred maintenance drops the comparable value by $30,000 to $40,000. What can we list at? $410. We'll be lucky to get $390. I looked at the dining room table, the oak surface, where I'd laid out $280,000 in documents, where my son had put his head on his arms and said okay. List it. The brokerage termination arrived by certified mail during Corey's second week at Maryhaven. His supervisor had included a formal demand for repayment of $80,000 in unearned commission advances. Sandra added it to the ledger. The broker's license suspension arrived separately, a single page from the Ohio Division of Real Estate. Administrative language that reduced 8 years of professional identity to a case number and a status code. Suspended. Pending felony adjudication. The professional network completed its work without ceremony. The mentor broker who'd celebrated the Grandview deal never called. Not once. Not during Maryhaven. Not during sentencing. Not after. The office admin stopped forwarding messages to a number that was no longer in service. In the world Corey had built, loyalty was transactional, and the transaction had ended. The house sold in 6 weeks. $385,000. A young couple from Grove City. They walked through the Colonial Revival on a Saturday afternoon, while I stood in the driveway and watched strangers measure the rooms my son had filled with lies. Their faces were eager, happy. They saw granite countertops and bay windows. I saw $280,000 in debt and a clear plastic hospital bag. After the mortgage payoff and the home equity line repayment, $45,000 remained. Sandra Foley allocated it the same day. The payday loans went first. She'd negotiated settlements at 60 cents on the dollar. $2,280 instead of $3,800. Before the 400% interest could compound another month, the remaining $42,720 went into escrow for the credit card repayment plan. Capital One, Chase Sapphire. The Secret Discover card, each on a separate schedule. Each payment managed by Sandra's office. 5 years. The charge sheet from the Franklin County prosecutor arrived at the bungalow on Phoebus Avenue in a manila envelope with an official seal. I opened it at the kitchen table wearing Donna's reading glasses. Aggravated vehicular assault. Ohio Revised Code 2903.08, third-degree felony. Prior DUI conviction noted as aggravating factor. Victim, Gerald Fossey, age 52. I set the document down, poured coffee, read it again. Corey's attorney was a public defender named Margaret Chen, not the $8,000 criminal defense firm. A court-appointed lawyer in a state-issued office with a caseload of 40. Corey had called me about it the week before from Maryhaven, his voice carrying the specific flatness of a man adjusting to a world where he couldn't buy his way through problems. She seems good, he'd said. She's direct. Direct is what you need. Margaret Chen negotiated terms based on two factors: Corey's voluntary entry into inpatient treatment before charges were filed, and his willingness to plead guilty without contest. Full cooperation. No games. No deal seeking. Gerald Fossey recovered. I learned this from Sandra, who had been tracking the medical costs to inform the court's restitution determination. 6 weeks in physical therapy. He regained mobility, but the pelvis healed with a slight misalignment that couldn't be corrected without a second surgery he didn't want. Gerald Fossey, a man who had been walking to a gas station at 2 in the morning, would walk with a limp for the rest of his life because my son drove drunk on Highway 315. Franklin County Courthouse on South High Street. The last of the winter mud had frozen in the cracks of the courthouse steps, and the wind cut across the plaza with nothing to stop it. I wore the peacoat, Donna's ring in my pocket, her reading glasses folded in the breast pocket of my flannel. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wooden pews, fluorescent tubes behind plastic diffusers that turned everything the same institutional gray as the hospital. An American flag behind the judge's bench, its colors muted under the flat light. A court reporter sat at a small desk, fingers poised over a stenotype machine. I sat in the 4th row. Jess sat beside me. Her hair was pulled back. She wore a dark blouse and the same jeans she'd worn to the dining room meeting. Her thumbnails were healing. The raw skin beside her cuticles had started to close. She folded her hands in her lap and kept them still. Corey stood at the defendant's table in a gray suit I didn't recognize. Too wide at the shoulders, too short in the sleeves. Borrowed. Margaret Chen stood beside him in a navy blazer with a legal pad on the table. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair cut short and no rings on her fingers, read the charges. Her voice carried the measured cadence of someone who had read thousands of charges and understood that each one contained a specific human wreckage that the legal language could only approximate. Mr. Strickland, you have entered a plea of guilty to 1 count of aggravated vehicular assault, a felony of the 3rd degree, in violation of Ohio Revised Code 29W3.08. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. The court notes the following mitigating factors. The defendant voluntarily entered inpatient substance abuse treatment. Treatment prior to formal charging. The defendant has cooperated fully with this office and with the victim's counsel. She paused, looked at Corey over the rim of her glasses. The court also notes the aggravating factors: a prior DUI conviction within the preceding 12 months, and a blood alcohol content of 0.14 at the time of the incident, nearly twice the legal limit. The courtroom was quiet. The stenotype machine clicked. The court sentences the defendant to 3 years of supervised probation, 500 hours of community service, mandatory continued substance abuse treatment, as directed by the probation officer. Restitution payments to the victim, Gerald Fossey, in an amount to be determined by this court, and suspension of driving privileges for a period of 2 years. She set down the document. The court does not impose a term of imprisonment at this time, based on the defendant's demonstrated commitment to rehabilitation. However, Mr. Strickland, this court wants to be clear. This felony conviction will remain on your record. Any violation of probation terms will result in immediate incarceration. Do you understand? Yes. Does the defendant wish to address the court? Margaret Chen nodded to Corey. He straightened. The borrowed suit shifted across his shoulders. His hands were flat on the defendant's table. No trembling. His eyes moved from the judge to the gallery, found me, held for a second, then moved to a point above the flag on the wall. I am responsible for what I did. I drove drunk. I hurt a man who did nothing wrong. Mr. Fossey will carry what I did for the rest of his life, and I accept that. I accept all of it. He sat down. Margaret Chen closed her legal pad. I watched my son's profile from the fourth row. The bruise on his cheekbone was gone. His complexion had cleared. 5 weeks of sobriety and institutional food had pulled the puffiness from his face, and underneath it was a jawline I recognized. My jaw. The jaw I'd seen in the delivery room mirror when the nurse asked if I needed to sit down. No preamble, no qualifiers. No look or listen. No mention of stress or grief or circumstances. The most honest words I'd heard from my son since before Donna died. The courtroom cleared. Jess and I walked out into the corridor. Neither of us spoke until we reached the truck. "He meant it," Jess said. "Yeah, the part about being responsible." I heard him. She looked out the passenger window. The courthouse parking lot. Cars and puddles and bare trees against a March sky that couldn't decide between gray and blue. "That's the first true thing he said in a year." Jess filed for legal separation at the Franklin County Domestic Relations Court on a Tuesday in early April. She told me at the kitchen table that evening, after Lily was in bed. 2 mugs of coffee between us, the surface of the table bare, except for the placemat with the roosters and Donna's ceramic salt shaker. The furnace ticked in the walls. The house was quiet. "Not divorce," she said. "Not yet. I need the boundary. I need it on paper. I understand. Do you think I'm wrong?" "I think you're protecting your daughter." She nodded. Her eyes were dry. She'd stopped crying weeks ago. The fear and exhaustion that had followed her through the hospital and the dining room meeting had settled into something more grounded. She went to work at Dr. Kimball's office. She picked Lily up from school. She cooked dinner in my kitchen, using pots that Donna had bought, and she didn't apologize for being there. The bungalow adjusted to 3. Jess and Lily moved in with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of Lily's drawings. The small bedroom at the end of the hall, the room Donna had used as a sewing room and I'd never converted, became Lily's. She taped her drawings to the walls. Bridges, arched structures with too many pillars and towers that leaned at angles that would give an engineer nightmares. She arranged Walt's carved turtle on the nightstand beside a photo of Donna that Jess had framed. The first night, Lily asked me to leave the hall light on. The second night, she asked me to close her door, but keep the light on. The third night, the door was closed and the light was off. I stood in the hallway and listened to nothing. Just the furnace and the wind and my granddaughter sleeping in the dark. Because the dark was safe again. Sunday morning in April. Rain had come through overnight, and the city smelled like wet pavement and new grass. I drove Lily to Green Lawn Cemetery. She rode in the passenger seat of my truck, feet not touching the floor, her puffy coat zipped to her chin. She'd brought a small rock from the bungalow's garden border. Gray granite, smooth on one side, rough on the other. She held it in both hands, the whole drive. We walked through Section 14 to Donna's headstone. The grass was starting to green at the edges where the snow had melted first. A cold wind moved through the bare trees, but the sun was out, low and hard, cutting shadows across the stone markers. A thin line of moss had started along the base of the granite, pale green against polished gray. Lily read the headstone aloud. Donna Marie Strickland, 1962-2024. She traced the engraved words with her finger. She saw what others missed. "What does that mean, Grandpa?" "It means your grandma paid attention." Lily knelt and placed the rock on top of the headstone. She positioned it with care, testing its balance, making sure it wouldn't roll off in the wind. "I saw this in a movie," she said. "It means you came to visit." I looked at the rock, at Donna's name, at my granddaughter's hands adjusting the stone with the same precision she used when drawing bridges. That's exactly what it means. Walt had transferred to Sunrise Rehabilitation Center by the time I visited in late March. His room was on the second floor, bigger than the hospital space, with a window overlooking a courtyard where 4 wooden benches sat empty in the lingering cold. The linoleum was clean. The air carried disinfectant and something from the kitchen 2 floors down. His menagerie covered the windowsill. Fox, bear, heron, turtle. 3 rabbits, and beside them, still rough at the edges, a small wooden bridge. 2 arches, a flat deck, grooves cut into the surface to suggest planking. Been working on it? Walt said from his recliner. His voice was thinner than at Grant Medical. The oxygen concentrator hummed beside him, but his eyes were the same, alert behind the taped glasses. Saw your bridges in my head and thought, why not? I pulled a box from my coat pocket. Inside, wrapped in a shop rag, a carving knife, 3-inch blade, rosewood handle, small enough to pass the facility's rules. I checked before buying it. Walt took it from the box. His hands turned it over the way a man handles a tool he's been missing. The tremor in his fingers steadied when they found the grip. 40 years of muscle memory, overriding whatever the emphysema had taken from the rest of him. This is a real knife, he said. Thought you'd earned one. He set it on the arm of the recliner and looked at me. The courtyard outside was empty. A cardinal landed on one of the benches, stayed for 2 seconds, and flew off. Your boy, Walt said. How's he doing? He's doing the work. That's what they say in the first month. The question is, month 3, month 6. I know. Walt nodded. His hand rested on the carving knife. We sat in the quiet of a rehabilitation center on a Tuesday afternoon, and there was nothing to explain. 2 men who had buried wives and broken sons and come out the other side, carrying different versions of the same weight. Letter came, Walt said. He gestured toward the bedside table. A single envelope. Prison stationery. The return address, printed in careful block letters, Pickaway Correctional Institution. Tommy Dunmore's name above it. The envelope was unopened. The seal intact. I'm not ready, neighbor. Walt's eyes moved to the envelope, then back to me, but I'm closer than I was. I didn't tell him to open it, didn't tell him to forgive, didn't tell him what Donna would have done, because Donna's answers were Donna's, and Walt needed his own. Take your time, I said. That's the only thing I've got left, Walt said. He tried a smile. It landed this time. By May, the trees along Phoebus Avenue had filled in, green against the brick. Donna's dormant lavender bushes pushed new growth from the base, the first purple buds showing at the tips. The bungalow smelled of solder and lavender, and, now, the crayons and colored pencils Lily left scattered across the kitchen table. Corey came out of the sober living facility and into an outpatient program. 3 meetings a week. Random testing. He found a job at a distribution warehouse on the west side. 18 an hour. Loading trucks. Carrying boxes. Punching a clock at 6 a.m. and punching out at 2:30 p.m. His first honest paycheck went into an account. Sandra Foley monitored. He visited Lily on weekends. Saturday mornings. Not court-ordered. An agreement between me and Jess and Corey, built on the same principle as the rehab and the house sale and the debt plan. Structure first. Trust second. Trust earned in increments too small to see from day to day, but visible over weeks. I drove past the warehouse one afternoon in April. Didn't plan to. Just took a different route home from a supply run. The loading dock, the trucks backed into bays. Men in work gloves and high-vis vests, moving pallets and boxes. Corey was on the dock. He carried a box that looked heavy from the way his shoulders set. His build had changed. 3 months of physical labor and institutional food and no bourbon had pulled the softness out. His arms filled his shirt sleeves differently. His posture was straighter, weight forward, the lean of a man working his body instead of hiding behind a desk. He set the box on a pallet. wiped his forehead with his sleeve, picked up the next box. His hands gripped the cardboard with the same unconscious confidence I'd seen on the fabrication floor for 38 years. The grip of a man who works with his hands. I didn't feel pride. Not yet. What I felt was simpler and harder to name. The absence of dread. For a year, every Sunday dinner Corey canceled. Every phone call that started with, "Look." Every visit to Westerville, where the snow wasn't shoveled and the mail piled up had carried a hum I couldn't name until it stopped. That hum was gone. In its place, quiet. The sound of a pipe that's holding pressure. Jess and Corey attended counseling. Separately. Different offices. Different therapists. Whatever they were building or unbuilding, they were doing it apart, which was its own kind of honesty. Pete Aguilar called on a Wednesday in May. "Strick, you coming back, or do I need to find another foreman who can read pipe specs without his reading glasses?" "I'll be there Monday." Good. Because Jankowski installed a reducer backwards and nobody caught it. Monday morning, 5:45 a.m. I laced my Red Wings in the bedroom. Donna's glasses on the nightstand. Her ring in my pocket. The peacoat in the closet. Carhartt flannel and jeans, and the steel toes that had walked the fabrication floor for 38 years. The crew was already on the floor when I walked through the gate. Welding arcs, pipe saws. The clang of steel that I'd been hearing since I was 26 years old. Pete nodded from his glass-walled office. No speech. No ceremony. Just a nod. I worked a full shift. 8 hours. The first since February. My hands found the tools the way Walt's had found the carving knife. The same muscle memory. The same fit. That evening, my phone buzzed. A text from the crew group chat. "Welcome back, Strick. Still invested? Hit like and rate my story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Tell me why." I read them all. Late May. A Saturday warm enough to leave the garage door open 3 feet for air. Sunlight cut across the workshop floor in a bright stripe that fell short of the workbench. I stood at the bench with Donna's reading glasses on my nose and the soldering iron in my right hand. The tip was hot and ready. The flux paste smelled sharp and clean, the way it always does when the iron is at the right temperature. 370 degrees. Too hot and the joint burns through. Too cool and the solder won't flow. You learn the window. The Ponte Vecchio's fourth arch sat clamped in the jig. I'd cut it 2 years ago, measured it, drawn the curve on graph paper, then set down the iron and couldn't pick it up again. The brass had oxidized to a dull green at the contact points where the solder was supposed to bond. I'd cleaned it that morning with fine grit sandpaper until the metal showed bright again. The solder flowed. I held the joint for 3 seconds. Let it cool. Solid. The fourth arch locked into position between the base plate and the deck span, and the bridge looked like a bridge again instead of something abandoned. Lily sat on the metal stool beside me, her feet hooked around the legs because they didn't reach the floor. She turned 10 in March. A sheet of drawing paper covered her lap, colored pencils in a coffee can at her elbow. She was working on a bridge of her own. 2 arches that leaned in different directions. Towers that changed width halfway up. Her name signed in the bottom corner in green pencil. The Y, reaching down below the line like a root. "Grandpa." "Yeah, why are Grandma's glasses on your face?" I set the soldering iron in its stand, looked at her over the wire rims. They helped me see the small things. Lily considered this. She picked up a blue pencil and added water under her bridge. The blue went outside the lines and stayed there. "Can I try them? When you're older?" "That's what you say about the soldering iron." "That's because I'm right about both." She went back to her drawing. I went back to the fourth arch, checking the joint from 3 angles, the way I check every joint. Solid. Clean. No cold spots? Donna would have said, I was stalling. She would have been right. I measured the fifth arch against the template, marked the cut line, and set the brass stock in the bench shear. The blades bit through with a clean snap. Last Tuesday at sunrise, Walt's windowsill had held its menagerie. Fox, bear, heron, turtle, 3 rabbits. And beside them, completed, a small wooden bridge with 2 arches and a flat deck grooved to suggest planking. The carving knife I'd given him lay beside it, the rosewood handle worn smooth at the grip. Tommy's letter was open on the bedside table. He'd broken the seal. The prison stationery sat creased and recreased at the folds. Walt hadn't written back, hadn't called, but the envelope wasn't in the trash, and the letter wasn't in the drawer. He'd opened it. That was enough for now. A car door in the driveway. I heard it through the open garage door. Not my truck. Something smaller. Footsteps on the concrete. Then a pause at the workshop doorway. Corey stood there. He'd lost 20 pounds since February. The softness was gone from his face, and his arms filled his shirt sleeves with warehouse muscle. The kind that comes from lifting boxes 8 hours a day. His hair was cut short. His eyes were clear, brown, Donna's brown, and they met mine without sliding away. A co-worker's sedan idled at the curb behind him. Corey raised a hand to the driver. The car pulled away. 2 years without a license meant 2 years of rides from other people. He'd accepted that the way he'd accepted the rest of it. He didn't come in, just stood there with his hands at his sides, watching me hold the soldering iron over the fifth arch's contact point. The flux paste sizzled. The solder ran into the joint. He didn't say look. He didn't say listen. He watched, waited. Can you show me how? He asked. 5 words. No salesmanship, no preamble. I reached across the bench without looking up and picked up the 7/16 wrench. Held it out. Hold this steady. Corey took the wrench. His fingers closed around the handle. His grip was firm and his hand was still. He positioned the wrench where I pointed, against the clamp that held the fifth arch in alignment, and he held it. I soldered. The flux hissed. The joint formed. Lily looked up from her drawing. She studied Corey's hand on the wrench, and my hand on the iron and the brass arch taking shape between us. Then she went back to her bridge, adding a second shade of blue to the water. The garage smelled of solder, and underneath it, something else. Lavender, fading but present. The way Donna was present in the glasses on my face, and the ring warm in my pocket, and the clause that had saved our house, and the note that had saved our son. The Ponte Vecchio wasn't finished. The fifth arch was solid, and the sixth was cut and ready. But the seventh and eighth were still lines on graph paper, and that was fine. Bridges aren't built in a day. They're built one joint at a time. Lily's pencil scratched on paper. The soldering iron hummed in my hand. Corey held the wrench steady. I didn't say anything about love being a decision. I just decided, one joint at a time.